kids are very often a result not to churn a service. So parents will not churn a streaming service if there's content on there that services their kids.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Retention Zone. I'm happy to have with me Jo Redfern, and I let Jo introduce herself at start.
Thank you. Thank you for having me along, Carlo. Yes, I'm Jo. I've spent most of my career in the world of kids media, which includes streaming and making content for kids, but in recent years has developed into an obsession with how young people consume content, the platforms they consume it on, why they like it, what they value, which is very often very different to what older generations value. And that's also brought me into the world of sport, because the sports content consumption habits of young people could not be more different to those from their parents. And that includes on streaming platforms and on YouTube, increasingly in gaming. So fair to say that I am obsessed with young people and their love of sports media and how that's evidenced and how they show that fandom and what ultimately they'll be willing to pay for.
So exactly. So I see two angles and in contest for this episode. One, very often in household, the real decision maker on which platform we will subscribe are the kids. Mm-hmm. And second, they are the customer of the future. So let's start from how do you see the panorama, the landscape in streaming, especially focusing on the younger generation?
Streaming for the younger generations, I mean, it's what's interesting to set a context is that younger generations, in terms of their fandoms, they've got more fandoms than ever before. And that works in sport, but it works across the piece. They might be sports fans, they might like soccer, they might like volleyball, but they also love sci-fi. They love animation, anime having a huge resurgence. So actually, a lot of research shows that if we're going to count the number of fandoms that young people have, they have more than previous generations. So that has an impact on how they go about satisfying those fandoms. If they're sports fans and they need to subscribe to multiple OTT platforms to service that fandom, that becomes a problem when they've got things like subscription fatigue, and also when they do age into becoming the paying consumers themselves and not the parents, then they have to start making choices, right?
Yes.
But going backwards, yes, kids are very often a result not to churn a service. So parents will not churn a streaming service if there's content on there that services their kids. It's a very different consumption pattern, because if you've got kids in your life, you will know that they will watch things over and over and over. So there is actually quite a long shelf life for kids' content, but because it's not measured in the same way as big tentpole streaming events, whether it's sport or whether it's the new season of Succession, it makes it really hard for those senior execs at streamers to really categorize how valuable kids content can be. Although, as you said, and you're right to point out, that kids are very often a reason not to churn a service. I mean, which parent wants their kids pestering them because they can no longer access their favorite content? But when we come to that in sports, this idea that young people have got more fandoms than ever before then forces us to think about how they go about accessing that. And piracy is a big issue that streamers complain about a lot. Why are young people, particularly where sports is concerned, watching pirate feeds on YouTube? This is a big issue. I shy away from demonizing young people too much and basically lumping them with that whole kind of piracy moniker, because if they're being forced into doing that, that shows there's a problem elsewhere that needs solving. You can't just demonize young people for watching pirate feeds. Basically, that shows that they're not being able to access the content, the sporting content they love elsewhere. So let's take a step back and look at why. But I think from a streamer's point of view, and I'm thinking, because today is the day that, is it Logan Paul or Jake Paul that's fighting Mike Tyson?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, you look at big sporting events like that, that's almost back to scheduled events, right? That's something
Absolutely.
That streaming,
it is.
It's back to linear kind of broadcast schedule events. But that's the kind of thing that is going to stem churn on streaming platforms. but interesting that it's a YouTuber that is being selected to go up against Mike Tyson, because he brings with him all of those fans and those eyeballs and those consumers that have actually initially found him on third-party platforms like YouTube. So all of that is to say, really, we've got this whole maelstrom of things happening around streaming with young people's media consumption behaviors, their fandoms in sport. We're moving from the age of customer acquisition into streaming to the age of retention. So again, you've got to start thinking about servicing young people and their fandoms. But I do think, for me, sports is going to be the next big battleground, actually, in terms of retention for streamers. And I think they're beginning to realize that. Netflix paying for WWE rights, for example. So really, really interesting shifts that are happening all the time.
And one thing that I noticed is also, you saw recently, but also this season, they're trying to do, for example, NFL games with the Simpsons now. I think it's Warner Bros. I don't remember who's doing that. So there are a lot of new things also, what we think kids will like. I think they will. So trying to make more, closer to what they like, to the it's still, again, fandom, I think. So I love what you said about the many fandoms that the young generation have. I think that's...
And I think with the technology, there's two things at play here. Technology facilitates those different ways of viewing. So with the same game, with the same match, you can service 3 or 4 different demographics. You've got your diehard core fans, you've got the dad who's 45, who, loves to watch the game as it's broadcast. But then you've got younger people who might want overlays. It could be The Simpsons, it could be Toy Story, it could be augmented reality overlays, or it could be as simple as data. Sports is obsessed with gathering data, but actually young people like a bit of data too. They love stats, they love who's had most of the play, and now you're able to overlay that kind of data on a lot of the feeds in streamers. So actually it's that gamification word. It's often overused, but actually it can be really interesting, and young people tend to love that. That also gives streamers, with regards to sports, an option to start building in premium tier pricing. You want the bells and whistles, you want the extra overlays.
Absolutely.
Actually, you have to pay for that. So I think that gives them a point of differentiation as well. And I see that becoming a really interesting battleground. And I know no better genre than sports, where you can start building in those premium tiers for all of those different data overlays, or your favorite characters playing an NFL game. So I think that gives them a competitive advantage. And also knowing that young people love this immersive, interactive way of engaging with content. When we were kids, Carlo, if we wanted to watch sport, really, we watched it on the big screen TV, and that was it. It was a one-way conversation.
Absolutely.
But now young people, if they want to engage in their sports fandoms, yes, they still want to watch, but again, they like these almost parallel accompanying digital experiences. They will be on their phone looking up data, looking up plays, and then we get into gaming. Then they want to go in and they want to play themselves. They want to engage in their favorite sports, put on the team jersey onto their avatar in a gaming space. So you have this level of immersion and interactivity into sport that kids demand. So again, I think streamers are increasingly looking at how they can build that into their sports offers, and then potentially put a premium price on it, right? Because we're into this era of profitability over new customer acquisition.
Yeah, I would say so. One question I have, because I'm often on stage, and there is this idea that's very often repeated, that kids and say it in general, so we avoid Gen Z, Gen Alpha. Kids normally don't want to watch a full live game, right? Do you think it's true? What is your point of view on that?
I think it's more difficult to get them to sit and watch a full-length game. And those super fans, yes, they will, of course, if it's their favorite team or their favorite athlete or player. But it comes down to how they consume content, because digital natives have grown up with YouTube. They've grown up with their own phones from being relatively young. They're used to snacking on content. They're used to thousands of pieces of content there vying for their attention. And if it doesn't keep their interest, there's another piece of content right there saying, hey, click on me, I'm interesting. So we find that very often in YouTube spaces, a lot of YouTube creators do, they create content in what's called a spark stoke reward model. And if I may, I'll just explain it very, very briefly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
But spark means spark their interest. So it can be everything from the thumbnail. There's a lot of science, even around the thumbnail, the icons, the pictures that make you click through. Then you've got that first 2 seconds of content that's got to grab your interest, literally 2 seconds. So that's the spark. Then the stoke is, okay, now we're going to build to something. This is where sports can be quite interesting because you've got action all the time. And then you reward that interest. Now, that reward in sports might be a good play, a goal, a foul, a controversial call. And if you can have spark, stoke, reward, and that loop keeps going, then you can maintain interest. The problem comes when if you've got a 90-minute game of football and there's a 15-minute period in the first half where there's not much happening, then that's where that model falls down, because immediately then a young person's like, there's something else over here that's in the corner of my eye that's saying, click on me. I'm going to keep your interest. So I always say attention spans, kids' attention spans are just fine. It's their interest spans that have shortened. And that's where 90-minute sport games really struggle, or, a full baseball game, because there are periods of inactivity where their interest tends to wander. But that doesn't mean that you can't do that with other parts, with the same content, but do it elsewhere. So you have got TikTok, you have got gaming platforms where you can service that loop better. So I think just considering keeping them in their ecosystem, acknowledging that not as many will watch full games, but that doesn't mean that they're not fans. You've just got to service their fandom in other ways. And eventually you might find that they actually do come back round to being fans and watching longer games. It's just how you bring them on that journey from being young.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned already TikTok, and so say social media in general. And I even want to position a bit in the space. I don't know, do we want to call it big tech? Because there is media and big media, so the more traditional names. And there is big tech, which for me is Amazon Prime, Apple.
Yes.
If you want, Netflix and DAZN could be in that area, even if they're not so big. And then there is like social per se. So I don't like to do prediction, but the scenarios that you think can develop from here. I have seen consolidation on media just to resist. I've seen, especially more in the US than in Europe, big tech becoming really super interesting in sport, like you mentioned, Netflix, the others. And social trying to be the vehicle of every fandom in the end.
Yes. Yeah. And for me, each one serves its purpose for fandoms. And, I wouldn't bet against big tech. Big tech are super powerful. And I think they're looking at sports now as a growth opportunity. And that is really interesting, because I think entertainment is largely that battle is almost settled. But sports is a new battleground, because you've got the core sports content, which to this point is the valuable content, right? Especially for sports rights holders, commanding big MGs, multi-year deals from broadcasters. But actually they're in decline, and we know that they will continue being in decline, particularly as younger generations don't necessarily subscribe to ESPN or TNT. But the old kind of content that used to be classed as low value, and that would be the behind the scenes, the talking heads in the tunnel, the if you're a Formula One, the pit lane behind the scenes stuff, that almost used to be perceived by the rights holders as filler. But then and low value content, then you get Drive to Survive that actually goes crazy, brings a whole load of new young fans into Formula One, a load of female fans. And that's actually because those younger generations that have grown up watching YouTube, they love that kind of content. That's the perfect space for them to consume that content. So now I think there's almost a tension where for young people, and streamers and OTT platforms have got to get to grips with this, is that the core sports content still has a value, But here you've got this other content, this shoulder content, the halo content used to be dismissed as the low value stuff, is increasing in value because that's drawing people in via those social platforms. So if we consider those platforms as all part of an ecosystem where sports should survive, you start thinking about that being very high value content, because that's the snackable stuff that you could put on TikTok and you're like, whoa, I really need to know in Formula One which team principal is the bad guy and which team principal is a good guy. That kind of stuff works really well on TikTok. But you start engaging new fans there and you bounce them around to a broadcaster, or you bounce them around to the YouTube channel, you start building them in terms of you've got that flywheel, that ecosystem that that's the holy grail. Get them into your ecosystem and don't let them leave. So that's where all of these different types of contents that are in and around sport start to make sense when you plug them in and work them together, make each one service the rest of that flywheel. So I find that really interesting. I think sports really has to look at what in entertainment we call that transmedia strategy. Much more sports should really look at that transmedia strategy. What's your social platform? What's your gaming platform strategy? What's your streamer strategy? What's your YouTube strategy? As a way to bring in new fans and start, then those new monetization and business models will start to emerge.
I agree. And I have to say, as a message, just to, if you want to wrap up what you were saying mostly, and I agree most of it, I've seen it happening, is sport in general has to open up to other, whatever you call, entertainment spaces around. Different platform. Most of if you want, the smart and sports are already doing it a lot. Maybe what is still missing is a bit of the ecosystem strategy is sometimes a bit random, because in certain entities you still have people in charge for digital, people in charge for social, people in charge for streaming in different departments, maybe reported to this. So but I think that's and on the other end, I think sport is doing, in some ways, is doing very well. It's not a content that is fading, because there is something in sport that is not. I wrote a little provocation blog lately called "Is Sport Unbeatable?" And I think maybe not, but it seems it's resilient at least.
Oh, for sure. I agree completely. Sport is enduring. It will endure. It's just how sport is the product and how the content that it creates is articulated will change over time. Well, that happens in history, right? We went from printed media to visual media. So it's just another evolution. But I think sport will endure. It's been around thousands of years so far. I don't think it's going anywhere. I just think we're at a stage where we're at perhaps an inflection point. And I think where, I'm a storyteller. Coming from kids media, I'm a storyteller. But I look at sport, and sport is the best crucible for storytelling that there is. You've got the good guys, the bad guys. You've got the underdog story. You've got the hero's journey. They are all things that work in storytelling. So I think to embrace that ecosystem, I think to your point, I think to some extent there needs to be a restructure. Digital over here, social here. You can't think about those as verticals and separate silos anymore. You need to think about them as that ecosystem. What's the fan journey around the ecosystem? If you've got a young person and their first engagement with paddle or pickleball is playing the game on Roblox, how do you take them from that to watching content to hopefully at some point saying to mom and dad, I want to go and buy a paddle or a pickleball set. I want to try this out in real life. We've got to think about that in terms of engagement, participation, viewing. And then when we started thinking in terms of that sports ecosystem, then the opportunities to monetize will come. And that's what's not clear yet. And of course, that's frustrating for commercial managers in sports that have got targets and minimum guarantees to meet. But I think if we're really looking at those younger demographics, those Gen Alphas, those young Gen Zs, sport really needs to reorient in terms of that multi-platform strategy and think about how they bring fans into the ecosystem and how they give them the right kind of content at the right time in the right platform. And at some point, hopefully that encourages them to go and play in real life, because kids still need to go and play sport in real life. That's very important. But then I think that will start to build new models for this sustainable future for sport. And that's something that I'm really keen. Something I hope to help with.
Summarizing, we could also say that a good combination for customer retention is the duo of sport and kids. And maybe obviously sport is obvious, it's good for customer retention because people want to watch the season, etc. But this idea of also playing with the kids content and why you don't want to possibly disappoint your kids and cancel a subscription, I think that's very powerful.
It is. Okay. It is. Kids are decision makers. They drive a lot of household.
Tell me, I have 4. So va bene. Thank you, Joe. It was a very refreshing point of view, and it's good. I was really happy to have you on the Retention Zone. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. It's been a treat. Yes, thank you.